My name is Arthur Brennan. I am 68 years old. I am a retired architect. I am a widower. And I am a father who drove 1,800 miles with a gift I had spent 6 months of my life preparing, only to watch the man my daughter married pick it up, smirk like I was some kind of joke, and throw it in the trash, not behind closed doors, not in a private moment of cruelty right there, in front of everyone, in front of my family, in front of strangers at neighboring tables. In front of my daughter, who stood there and watched it happen and said nothing, not a word, not a sound. She just looked away, like I was an embarrassment she'd already learned to manage. I want you to sit with that for a moment before I go any further. Because I need you to understand what it feels like to be 68 years old, to have given your entire life to one person, to have sacrificed things you cannot get back, to have driven alone across this country with something you built with your own hands and your own heartbreak, and then to stand there and watch it get thrown in the garbage like it was an old newspaper. That's what happened to me. And before I tell you everything, before I tell you about the gift, about what was inside it, about the phone calls and the voicemails, and what happened at 3 o'clock in the morning 3 days later, I need you to go back with me. I need you to understand who I am, how I got here, and why that gift mattered more than I will ever be able to explain. Because this story isn't just about one terrible night at an anniversary dinner. This story is about a lifetime. What happens when the people you love with everything you have decide that everything you have isn't worth very much? I became an architect because I believed in building things that lasted. Structures that would stand long after the people who commissioned them were gone. I spent 35 years drawing blueprints, calculating load-bearing walls, designing homes for families I would never meet. I was good at it. I was never famous. I was never wealthy, but I was good at it, and I took pride in that. My wife, Carol, used to say that I put the same care into our home that I put into my work, that I thought about every corner, every doorway, every window, not as a professional exercise, but as an act of love. She said living in a house that Arthur Brennan designed was like living inside someone's heart. She said that to me once, and I have never forgotten it. Carol died 11 years ago, pancreatic cancer. She was 57 years old. We had 31 years together, and I will tell you plainly that the only thing that kept me standing after she was gone was our daughter, my daughter, the girl I raised. Her name is, and I'll call her what she's always been to me, my girl, my Emma. Emma was 25 when her mother died. She was already out of college, already working, already becoming the woman Carol and I had hoped she'd be. Fierce, smart, funny in a way that made you catch your breath, because the joke would come from somewhere unexpected and true. She had Carol's eyes and my stubbornness, and that combination should have terrified me, but instead it made me love her so completely that even now, after everything, I cannot fully hate her for what she let happen. The years after Carol's death were hard. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. I rattled around in the house in Oregon, the house I had designed myself, every room a memory, and I did the best I could. I cooked badly, I walked too much. I called Emma too often at first, then not often enough, trying to find the right distance so I wouldn't burden her. She called me every Sunday for a long time. We'd talk for an hour sometimes, about nothing, about everything. She'd tell me about her week, about her friends, about a book she was reading or a restaurant she'd tried. And I would sit in the kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold in my hands and feel, despite everything, that the world was still intact. Then she met Colt. His name is Colt Lawson. He was 32 when they met, 39 now. He's in finance, investment banking or wealth management or something that involves a lot of confidence and a lot of expensive shoes. Emma met him at a company retreat. She told me about him on a Sunday call about 3 months into their relationship. And even then, even when her voice was bright with excitement and I was genuinely happy for her, something in me went quiet. I don't know how to explain that. I'm not a superstitious man. I don't believe in premonitions. But there was something in the way she described him, something in the particular kind of admiration she had for him that made me uneasy. Like she was describing someone she was trying to impress rather than someone who impressed her. I told myself I was being a protective father. I told myself I was projecting my grief, my fear of losing her. I let it go. I should have paid more attention to that quiet thing inside me. They got married 2 years after they met. I flew out for the wedding. I paid for a good portion of it, actually, though that's not a card I would ever play except to say that I was present. I was trying. I gave a toast that made Emma cry, and I danced with her to the song she and Carol had loved, and I shook Colt's hand and told him to take care of her. He shook my hand back with a smile I couldn't quite read. even then. Right there at his own wedding, looking into my eyes with my daughter on his arm, he smiled at me in a way that I could not decipher. Not warmth, not hostility, something else. Something that said, I see you and I've already decided what you are. I was the old man. The widower architect from Oregon with the modest savings account and the house full of blueprints and the Sunday phone calls that were getting shorter. That's what I was to Colt Lawson from the very beginning. A background character in a story about himself. The first time he was openly rude to me, Emma and Colt had been married about 8 months. I'd flown out to visit them in their new house in Colorado, a beautiful house. I will say that, all glass and steel and clean lines, the kind of house designed to impress people rather than to hold them. I brought a bottle of wine I couldn't really afford because I'd read that it was good, and I brought some homemade jam that Carol and I used to make together every fall from the plum trees in our backyard, and I brought a framed photograph of Emma as a child that I'd restored and printed on archival paper. Colt looked at the photograph and said, "HM," and set it on the kitchen counter. It was never hung. I looked for it the next morning, and it was in a drawer. He looked at the jam and said, "We try not to do a lot of refined sugar." He looked at the wine and nodded and said nothing about it and opened a different bottle that evening. Small things. I told myself they were small things. I told myself he was distracted, that he'd had a hard week at work, that he was one of those people who needed time to warm up. I told myself Emma would not have married someone unkind. Emma sat across from me at dinner that night and laughed at something Colt said and didn't notice the photograph was in a drawer. And when I mentioned Carol just once, just briefly, saying something about how Carol would have loved the view from their back deck, Colt changed the subject immediately. Briskly, like flipping a page, Emma let him. That was the moment. Looking back, I can trace everything to that moment. Not the rudeness. I've dealt with rude people my whole life. It was Emma letting him. It was the way she moved with him, the way her eyes flicked to his face to read his reaction before she registered her own. Something had shifted in my daughter. Some essential self-possession had been replaced by a kind of vigilance. She was always watching him, always calibrating. I noticed, and I said nothing, because I had spent 50 years learning that you cannot tell the people you love who to love. You can only be present. You can only keep the door open, so I kept the door open. I visited when I was invited and stayed shorter than I wanted to. I called on Sundays even when Emma picked up sounding distracted, even when I could hear Colt in the background, and the call would end after 15 minutes instead of an hour. I sent cards for birthdays and anniversaries. I sent small gifts, always modest, always chosen with care, always received with something that looked like politeness but felt like tolerance. I was being tolerated by my own daughter's household, by the man she chose, and slowly, steadily, I was being faded out. The Sunday calls stopped being weekly and became monthly. The visits became annual, then less than annual. When Emma and Colt traveled, they traveled to places Colt wanted to go. When holidays came, they were spent with Colt's family in Connecticut. And I would get a phone call on Christmas morning that lasted 12 minutes and ended with Emma saying, "I love you, Dad, we'll talk soon." Soon, I became a soon. I want to be honest with you about something because I think it's important. I was not a perfect father. I was distracted sometimes when Emma was young. I worked too many hours in the years when she was a teenager. There were school plays I missed and arguments I handled badly and periods of grief after Carol's diagnosis when I was so frightened that I pulled inward and left Emma to manage more than she should have had to. I know that. I have never pretended otherwise. I have apologized for those things. I have carried them. But there is a difference between a father who was imperfect and a father who didn't love his child. And I loved Emma. I loved her with everything I had. I love her still, even after what she let happen, even after that restaurant, even after she looked away. You cannot stop loving your children just because they break your heart. You can be devastated and you can be angry and you can lie awake at 3 in the morning wondering what you did wrong and what you could have done differently, but you cannot stop. That love is not optional. It is structural. It is load-bearing. Without it, something essential in you collapses, trust me. I know something about load-bearing structures. 6 months before Emma and Colt's 5th wedding anniversary, I decided to do something. I want to be careful here about what I tell you, because part of what makes this story what it is, part of what made that night at the restaurant what it was, is what was inside that gift. And I'll get there. I'll tell you everything. But I want you to feel the weight of it first, the way I felt the weight of it through all those months of preparation, before you know what it was, I decided to build something for them, not buy, build. I'm an architect. I have spent my life making things with my mind and my hands, translating something invisible into something real. When I love people, when I want to show them what they mean to me, I don't buy things off shelves. I make things. Carol always said that was one of the ways she knew I loved her, not because I said it, but because I showed up with things I had made. A bookshelf, a window seat, a garden wall, things that took time and care and deliberate thought. So 6 months out from Emma and Colt's 5th anniversary, I started building. I worked in the evenings. I worked on weekends. I worked through the winter, in a workroom I'd set up in what used to be the guest room, with Carol's old radio playing quietly in the corner and the Oregon rain against the windows and my hands doing what they'd always known how to do. I didn't tell Emma. I thought about it, thought about calling her on a Sunday and saying, "I'm working on something for you and Colt. I want you to know that you're on my mind," but I didn't. I wanted it to be a surprise. I wanted the moment of opening it to be something uncontaminated by anticipation. There were nights when it was hard, when I would be working and look up and see Carol's photograph on the desk, the one I kept in there, just the two of us at the coast, probably 1994, and feel the loneliness of the thing I was doing, building something alone that should have been built together. Preparing a gift for a daughter who called me soon and let her husband flip the page whenever Carol's name came up. But I kept going, because here is what I know at 68 years old that I did not know at 38. Love is not a feeling, not primarily. It is a decision, it is a practice. It is something you do in the dark when no one is watching, when there is no guarantee of return, when the person you're doing it for doesn't even know you're doing it. I had decided to love my daughter. I was practicing that love in a workroom in Oregon through a long wet winter, and when I was finished, I had something that was worth more than I had in every sense of that word. Something that would change things for Emma and Colt in ways that I won't detail yet, because the revelation of it is part of the story. What I will tell you is that it was not small. It was not a trinket. It was not the kind of thing you throw away. I wrapped it carefully. I padded it. I put it in a box, and I sealed the box, and I wrote Emma's name on it in the careful block letters I've used my whole professional life. The letters I use on blueprints, because they are legible and precise and will not be misread. And then I loaded it into my car, and I started driving. 1,800 miles is a long way to drive alone. I'm not a man who minds driving. I have always found something clarifying about long roads, the way your mind settles after the first few hours, the way the landscape changes without your actively noticing, the way you arrive somewhere having processed things you couldn't process standing still. Some of my best professional thinking happened on drives. Some of my worst grief too. The drive back from the hospital after Carol died. The drive to Emma's college graduation with the empty seat beside me. This drive was something in between. I left Oregon on a Tuesday morning in late spring, just after dawn, with coffee in a thermos and the radio tuned to a classical station until it faded out somewhere in the mountains, and I drove in silence. The box was in the back seat. I had put it there deliberately, not in the trunk, so I could see it in the rearview mirror. A reminder of why I was doing this. I drove through mountains and high desert and flatter country, and I thought about Emma. I thought about her at 7 years old, the year she decided she wanted to be an archaeologist. She had a plastic shovel and a serious expression, and she dug up half the backyard looking for bones. And when I came home from work and found the garden in ruins, I laughed until I cried. And Emma looked at me with enormous dignity and said, "Dad, science requires sacrifice." 7 years old. I put my arm around her and told her she was absolutely right. I thought about her at 12, when she broke her arm falling out of the oak tree in the backyard and sat in the emergency room not crying, refusing to cry, because she had decided that stoicism was the appropriate response. Carol and I exchanged looks over her head. She was so much herself already at 12. So completely Emma. I thought about her at 16, the year Carol was first diagnosed, the year everything got harder. Emma was old enough to understand and young enough to be terrified, and she handled it the way she handled everything, by becoming more competent. She took on tasks around the house without being asked. She drove Carol to appointments when I had to work. She sat with her mother in the evenings and talked and read aloud and did not let Carol see her cry. She cried with me though, once, just once. She came into the kitchen late at night and found me sitting at the table not doing anything, just sitting, and she sat down across from me and we cried together in the dark kitchen and didn't say a word to each other. We didn't need to. We both knew what we were afraid of. We both knew there was nothing to say about it that would help. We just sat there together in the crying. That's the daughter I was driving to see. That's the person I was making this drive for. I don't know when I stopped thinking about those memories and started thinking about the other ones. The distance, the shortened calls, the look on Colt's face at the wedding, the drawer where my photograph ended up. But at some point on that second day of driving, when I was somewhere in the flat middle stretch with the sky enormous above me and the road stretching ahead and the box visible in my rearview mirror, I felt something that I am going to call dread, not doubt. I wasn't doubting the gift. I wasn't doubting my love for Emma or my decision to make this drive. Dread, the kind that lives in the body, not the mind. The kind that knows something your brain hasn't caught up to yet. I pushed it down. I am good at pushing things down. It's a skill I developed out of necessity and have spent years trying to unlearn. But there are moments when it is still my first response. I pushed the dread down and I drove. I reached Colorado on the third day in the late afternoon, with the mountains pink in the slanting light and the air thinner than I was used to, and the city spread out below me as I came down from the pass. I had texted Emma that I was close. She had texted back a smiley face, just a smiley face, not words. An emoji. I held onto that like it was more than it was. I told myself it was warmth. I told myself it was her way of saying she was glad I was coming. I checked into the hotel I'd booked, nothing fancy, just clean and adequate, and I showered and changed into the good clothes I'd brought. The dark jacket and the collared shirt and the shoes I only wear when things matter. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror for a moment. 68 years old, gray at the temples, the kind of face that has had things happen to it. The kind of face that has done its crying and its working and its trying and is still here, still here. I picked up the box from the bed where I'd set it and I carried it carefully to the car. The restaurant was one of those places that exists to make you feel like you're somewhere important. Dark wood and low lighting and menus with no prices on them. The kind of place that Colt would choose for an anniversary dinner, which is not a judgment, just an observation. He liked things that signaled status. He was good at choosing signals. There were about 12 people there when I arrived. Emma and Colt. Colt's parents, a couple from Connecticut named Glenn and Patrice Lawson, who had the easy confidence of people who had never had to think too hard about money. Some of Colt's friends from work and their wives. A couple I recognized as Emma's friends from college, Nina and her husband. And I was glad to see them because they had known Emma before Colt, had known the real Emma, and they greeted me warmly and said my name correctly and asked how the drive was. Emma hugged me. She hugged me and for a moment I felt her, the real her, the daughter I'd driven 1,800 miles to see, and I held on a second longer than was socially acceptable and I didn't care. "I'm so glad you made it, Dad," she said into my shoulder. "Wouldn't have missed it," I said, and I meant it, even with the dread, even with everything. I meant it completely. I set the box at my place at the table. It was wrapped simply, brown paper and twine, the way I wrap everything, the way Carol always teased me about it because she said it looked like something from a general store in 1910. I didn't mind that. The wrapping was never the point. I sat down. Colt was at the head of the table, naturally. He was in a dark blue suit that I'm sure cost more than my car payment. He was holding a glass of something amber and laughing at something Glenn had said. He was in his element, Colt Lawson, in a room like this. He belonged to it. The lighting made him look important. He noticed me when he put his drink down and he nodded. Not warmly, not coldly, just a nod, the kind you give someone who is present and whose presence you are acknowledging without welcoming. The nod you give a hotel staff member who holds the door. I nodded back. The evening moved the way these evenings move, drinks and small talk, and the particular social theater of a table full of people who have all decided to perform a version of themselves that is a little more polished than the real one. I talked to Emma's friends. I talked to Glenn, who turned out to be perfectly decent once you got past the Connecticut polish. I looked at my daughter across the table, and she was laughing and beautiful, and I told myself that this was enough, that being here and seeing her happy was enough, regardless of everything else. I almost made it through the appetizers believing that. Then Colt noticed the box. I don't know what I was expecting. Not effusive thanks. Colt was not an effusive man, not genuine curiosity. I think what I was hoping for, at minimum, was neutral acknowledgement. The social baseline of a gift at a dinner table. Instead, he looked at the box with an expression that I can only describe as contemptuous amusement. like he'd found something mildly ridiculous and was enjoying the finding of it. He reached out and picked it up. He turned it over in his hands, reading the brown paper wrapping, the twine, the block-lettered label, and he smiled, not at me, not at Emma, just to himself or to the table in general, to no one in particular. "Whatever this is," he said, and his voice carried the particular ease of a man who has never had to worry about being overheard. "We don't need it." Table went quiet, not all the way quiet. There was still music, still the ambient sound of the restaurant, still someone laughing 2 tables over. But our table went quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when something has just been said that cannot be unsaid. I looked at Emma. Emma was looking at the table. I felt something happen in my chest. I have had occasion in my life to feel my heart do things, to leap with love, to ache with grief, to tighten with anxiety, but I had not felt this particular thing before. This was something quieter and colder than any of those. This was the feeling of something giving way. Not breaking, not the sharp, acute break of sudden shock, but the slow, structural giving way of something that has been under too much weight for too long. Colt stood up. He walked leisurely, unhurried, as though he was stretching his legs, as though this were entirely ordinary, to the tasteful wooden trash receptacle near the hostess stand, and he dropped my box into it. I heard it land. I heard the sound of it hitting the bottom of the receptacle, and I sat there and I thought about the workroom in Oregon and the winter evenings and Carol's radio and the months of work inside that brown paper wrapping. I thought about the plum tree Emma dug up looking for bones. I thought about the kitchen in the dark, the crying without words. I thought about the look on Emma's face. She was still looking at the table. Her hands were in her lap. She was very still, the way she used to be when she was 12 and refusing to cry, choosing stoicism over expression. And I understood in that moment, with a clarity I had been resisting for years, that this was not a new thing. This was practiced. She had learned to be still when Colt did things, to look elsewhere, to ride it out. My daughter had learned to let things happen. Nobody said anything. Nina started to say something. I saw her open her mouth, and her husband put his hand on her arm. Glenn took a long drink of his bourbon. Beatrice was very interested in her bread plate. I did not yell. I did not cry. I did not walk to Colt and say what I wanted to say, which was a great deal more than any restaurant could accommodate. I am 68 years old, and I have learned, at great personal cost, that there are moments when silence is the only response that preserves your own dignity. I reached under the table for my coat, which I had hung over the back of my chair. I stood up. I picked up my coat. I looked at Emma one more time, hoping she would look up, hoping she would say something, anything, even just Dad, so I would have a thread to hold on to. She didn't look up. I walked out of the restaurant. I don't remember the drive back to the hotel very well. I remember the lights of the city. I remember a red light that seemed to last a very long time. I remember parking and sitting in the parked car for what might have been 10 minutes or 45 minutes. I genuinely cannot tell you. I remember going to my room. I remember sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark, still in my good clothes, still in the shoes I only wear when things matter. I'm not a man given to dramatic emotion. Carol used to gently point this out, that I processed things internally, that she couldn't always tell what I was feeling, that sometimes she needed me to say the thing instead of just sitting with it. I worked on that. I never entirely fixed it, but sitting on the edge of that hotel bed in Colorado, I felt every single thing. I felt the humiliation, that specific, corrosive humiliation of being dismissed by someone who has decided you are beneath their consideration. Of watching something you made with love and time and sacrifice get thrown away like it was garbage. Because to him, it was garbage. I was garbage. The old man from Oregon in the dark jacket, the father-in-law he had never made any effort to see as a person. I felt the grief. Not new grief, not the sharp kind. This was the accumulated grief of 4 years of watching my daughter disappear into a life where there was less and less room for me. 4 years of shorter calls and postponed visits and smiley-face texts and Christmas mornings that lasted 12 minutes. 4 years of understanding, slowly and against my will, that Emma had made a choice about what kind of person she wanted to be, and that choice had been shaped by Colt in ways I could not undo. And I felt, beneath both of those things, something I am not proud of but will not lie about. I felt furious. Not the hot explosive fury of the moment that had already passed, replaced by the cold silence of the exit, the coat, the walk to the door. This was deeper. This was the fury of a father who has given everything and watched it be thrown in the trash. Not just the gift, everything, every Sunday phone call, every flight, every card, every carefully chosen modest gift that ended up in a drawer. The photograph of Emma's childhood on archival paper that Colt said HM to. The plum jam from the trees that Carol planted, all of it in the trash. All of it worth nothing to the man my daughter chose. I sat in that hotel room and felt all of those things, and then I did something I have done my whole life when the feelings get to be too much. I made a plan. I was going to drive home in the morning. I was not going to call. I was not going to send a message. I was going to drive the 1,800 miles back to Oregon in the same silence I had driven down in, and I was going to go back to my house and my workroom and Carol's radio, and I was going to figure out what came next. I was 68 years old. I had survived 31 years of marriage and 11 years of widowhood. I had survived the death of the woman I loved and the slow erosion of the relationship with my only child. I had survived a winter of work in a cold room, building something for people who couldn't be bothered to appreciate it. I would survive this too. I took off my shoes, lay down on top of the covers in my good clothes, and closed my eyes. I want to tell you about the drive home. I want to tell you because I think it matters, not dramatically, not as a plot point, but as a human thing. The texture of a hurt. What it actually feels like to drive 1,800 miles with something cracked open inside you that has no name. I left the hotel at 6 in the morning without eating. I stopped for coffee outside the city and sat in the parking lot of a gas station with the engine running and the radio off and drank it. There was an old man at the next pump filling his truck, and he nodded at me the way old men nod at each other when they're alone and it's early and the world is still gray. I nodded back. I thought about all the things I had not said in that restaurant. I am good at not saying things. I developed this skill in my marriage, not because Carol and I were unhappy. We were not. We were genuinely happy. But because I learned early that the things you say in anger are the things that echo longest. That you can unsay an action, but you cannot unsay a word. That the architecture of a relationship is damaged more by what's spoken than by what's done, sometimes. So I had not said the things I wanted to say to Colt Lawson in that restaurant. I had not said, "You are a small man in an expensive suit who has never built anything with his hands and who sees the people around you as props in your own story, and you will spend the rest of your life taking things for granted until there is nothing left to take." I had not said, "My daughter is worth more than the version of herself she has become since she met you, and some part of her knows it, and someday that knowledge is going to crack her open, and I hope I'm still here when it does." I had not said, "I drove 1,800 miles and I spent 6 months of my life on what was in that box, and you threw it away without knowing what it was, and that is a perfect summary of who you are and what you have done to this family." I had said nothing. I drove. The first day I made it to the high desert and stopped at a motel that was clean and terrible and slept for 9 hours, which I needed. The second day I crossed back into the mountains and the radio found a station and I listened to it without hearing it. The third day I was back in Oregon, the trees closing in again the way they do, the sky lower and greener, the air damper. I pulled into my driveway at 5 in the evening. I sat in the car. My house looked at me. This house I had designed, this house where Emma grew up, where Carol died, where I had spent the winter building something in the workroom. The plum trees were in bloom late this year, and I sat there in the car looking at them and thought, Carol would have been so angry that almost made me smile. Carol would have been incandescent. She would have been precise and controlled and absolutely devastating in her anger, the way she always was. She would have known exactly what to say to Emma, the exact combination of words that would crack through the distance and the conditioning and reach the real Emma underneath. She had a gift for that. She could find the load-bearing wall in any conversation and press on it. I did not have that gift. I got out of the car and went inside and made soup from a can because I had no appetite for anything more complicated. My phone had been ringing on and off for the last 2 days. I had let it ring. I had watched the screen light up with Emma's name and later with a number I didn't recognize that I assumed was Colt's, and I had let it go to voicemail each time. I had not listened to the voicemails. I was not ready to listen to the voicemails. I ate my soup and went to bed. The second day back, I went to the workroom. I don't know why. It wasn't a plan. I just found myself there, standing in the doorway, looking at the space, the long table where I had worked, the tools, Carol's radio. The lamp with the good bright light I'd bought specifically for detail work. The room felt emptied, not because anything was missing, everything was where I'd left it, but because the project was gone. The thing I had spent 6 months on, the thing that had given those long evenings a purpose and a warmth they would not otherwise have had, was sitting in a trash can in a Colorado restaurant, and I was standing in a workroom in Oregon, feeling the particular hollowness of finished grief. I picked up a pencil. Put it down, I turned on Carol's radio. A jazz station was playing something slow and late night and sad, which was precisely wrong and exactly right. And I sat down on the stool and I let myself feel it. Here is what I have learned about grief. After 11 years of practicing it, you cannot schedule it. You cannot manage it into a corner and attend to it on your terms. It comes when it comes, in the form it chooses, and your only option is to let it move through you. If you try to hold it back, it builds pressure and explodes sideways into rage or numbness or the particular misery of a person who has not cried in too long. So I let it move through me. I thought about Emma at 7 with her plastic shovel. I thought about Emma at 12 in the emergency room choosing stoicism. I thought about Emma at 25 at Carol's funeral, standing straight and dry-eyed through the service, and then coming to find me afterward in the church garden, just the two of us, and putting her head against my chest the way she hadn't since she was a child. I thought about Emma at 36 looking at the table while her husband threw my gift away. And I thought about the gift itself, about what was inside the box. I thought about why I had made it, what I had intended, what I had hoped it would mean for Emma and Colt, and honestly for me, for the relationship I had been trying to repair through an act of deliberate, enormous generosity. I had thought, and I admit this is the part that hurts the most in retrospect, the part I cannot tell you without shame, I had actually thought that it might help. That Colt would see what was inside that box and understand something about me that he had never been willing to see. That Emma would look at what her father had built for her and remember, I had built it as a bridge. He had thrown it in the trash. The jazz station played something I didn't know, and I sat in the workroom until the light faded, and then I went back inside and made tea and did not check my phone. On the second night, I finally listened to the voicemails. There were 11 of them. The first several were from Emma. Her voice in the first one was careful, controlled, the voice she uses when she is managing something. "Dad, I just wanted to make sure you got home okay. Please call me when you can." The second was a little less controlled. "Dad, I know you're probably upset. I understand that. Please call me." The third was at 2 in the morning and her voice was different, not controlled. Something had happened between the second voicemail and the third, something that changed her voice from careful management to something raw and irregular. Dad, please call me." I did not know yet what had changed, but something had. The next 3 voicemails were from a number I confirmed was Colt's. I listened to them with the particular attentiveness of someone trying to decode a message from a person they have never fully understood. The first was brief. "Arthur, it's Colt. It's been a listen, something's come up. Please call Emma." The second was longer and less composed. "Arthur, I need you to call me back. I understand I know tonight didn't go the way it should have. I need you to hear me on something. Please call." The third was different from both of them. The third voicemail from Colt Lawson was the voice of a man I had not heard before, because I was not sure this man had ever existed before that night. He was not confident. He was not dismissive. He was not performing for a room full of people in expensive suits. He was afraid. "Arthur, I owe you an apology. I know I can't just call and say that and have it mean anything given what happened. But I need you to know that I understand now what was in that box, and I need to talk to you. Please call me back." I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time after that. I did not call back, but I was listening now. "I want to tell you what was in the box. I've kept you waiting, and I know that, and I understand if you're impatient. But I needed you to have the whole weight of the story before I gave you this, because without the weight, it's just a plot point. With the weight, I hope it's something more. 6 months before Emma and Colt's 5th anniversary, I made a decision. Emma and Colt had been struggling in ways I knew about only partially and indirectly. Emma had mentioned, in one of our shorter phone calls, that things in Colorado were expensive, that Colt's firm had had a difficult year, that they had been talking about the future. She hadn't said more than that. She never said more than that to me. Colt would not have approved of her telling me too much. I understood that without being told, but I am her father, and I know her voice, and I heard in those few oblique sentences something that told me more than she was saying. They were struggling financially. Colt, for all his expensive suits and the restaurant with no prices on the menu, was not as secure as he appeared. The house, I suspected, was leveraged. The lifestyle was maintained partly by performance, and I had something. When Carol died, there were things she left. Small things, mostly jewelry, some of which I'd given Emma already. But there was also a piece of property. piece of land in Washington state that Carol had inherited from her parents and that we had held on to for 30 years, meaning to build on it someday, meaning to do something with it, and somehow never getting to the someday. The land had been sitting there, held in trust, gaining value for 3 decades. I had been thinking about what to do with it. And when I heard Emma's voice on that phone call and understood that she and Colt were struggling, I made a decision. I was going to give them the land. Not just the deed, though the deed was in the box. Yes, the legal transfer paperwork I had spent months arranging, through a real estate attorney, through the trust, through the proper channels, all signed and prepared and ready to be filed. But more than that, I was going to give them a gift that was also a plan. Drawings, architectural drawings. Months of evenings in the workroom, not just on paperwork, but on blueprints, actual blueprints, the way I used to do them by hand, for the house I had been imagining could be built on that land. A real house, not an investment property, not a financial asset. A home. A family home for the family I hoped they would build, with rooms for children who didn't exist yet, and a garden and a porch where someone could sit in the evenings and watch the light change. The land was worth, by recent appraisal, somewhere between $900,000 and $1.2 million. The drawings were priceless, not financially. In the other sense, that's what was in the box. That's what Colt Lawson threw in the trash. What happened after I left, I learned in pieces. From Emma, from Nina, who called me separately, from a few other things that came out over the following days. It was Nina who retrieved the box. She told me later that she did it almost automatically, that she stood up from the table before she even consciously decided to, walked to the trash receptacle and took it out. She said the table was still completely silent. She said Emma had not looked up. Nina carried the box back to the table and set it down in front of Emma. Emma looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at Nina. "Open it," Nina said. Emma said later that she wanted to say no. She said she was so deep in the practice numbness by that point, the numbness of a woman who has spent years learning to be still, to look away, to ride things out, that she almost couldn't do it. That opening the box felt like an act of disobedience that her whole body resisted. But she opened it, she looked at the deed first. She read it. She read my name and her name and the address of the property in Washington that had belonged to her mother's family for 50 years. She read the appraised value, which I had included not to show off, but because I thought they needed to know. Then she looked at the drawings. She sat at that anniversary dinner table in a restaurant with no prices on the menu, surrounded by Colt's people in Colt's world, and she went through the drawings one by one, my handwriting in the margins, the notes I'd made, the room labeled in careful block letters, children's room, future. The porch drawn with the dimensions I'd calculated for the view of the valley to the west. She said she didn't make a sound, but the tears came down. Colt had been standing near the hostess stand, watching Nina retrieve the box. He looked irritated, the particular irritation of a man whose grand gesture has been interrupted. Then confused. Then, as Emma opened the box and her face changed, something else crossed his expression. He walked back to the table. He looked over Emma's shoulder at the deed. He read the appraised value. I have been told by people who were there that the color left his face, that he stood very still for a moment, that he reached out and picked up the deed with both hands and read it again, carefully, the way you read something when you cannot believe it is true. And then he understood what he had done, not just the financial magnitude of it, though that was certainly part of what moved through his face in those moments, but something else too. I have to believe something else too, because if it was only the money, if it was purely the financial reckoning, then the story is just about greed, and I don't think it's only about greed. I think in that moment, holding the deed and looking at the drawings, even Colt Lawson felt the weight of what I had spent 6 months building in a workroom in Oregon. I think, for the first time, he saw me, not the old man from Oregon, not the background character, not the in-law who could be tolerated and managed and looked through, the person who had driven 1,800 miles alone and brought something irreplaceable in a brown paper box tied with twine and had sat down at the table with hope, still, after everything, with hope, and had been answered with contempt. I think he saw me, and I think it destroyed him. The phone calls had started within an hour of my leaving the restaurant. By the time I was back at the hotel, sitting on the bed in my good clothes, the phone had already begun. By the time I was on the highway the next morning, Emma had left 3 voicemails and Colt had left 1. By the time I was in the motel in the high desert, there were 11 messages between them. I didn't respond, not because I was punishing them, though I understand if it looked that way. I wasn't punishing them. I was taking care of myself. which is not something I have historically been very good at, and which I was determined, in the particular clarity of that long drive, to practice. I needed time, I needed to drive home. I needed to sit in the workroom with Carol's radio. I needed to eat bad soup from a can and sleep 9 hours and feel my feelings in the workroom and not speak to anyone until I was ready. That's what I did. The calls continued. Every day. Multiple times a day. Emma's voicemails got longer and less controlled. Colt's got shorter and more desperate. There were texts from Emma, mostly long, careful texts that I read without responding to, that told me things I needed to know without yet being ready to hear directly. 3 days after the anniversary dinner, at 3 o'clock in the morning, someone knocked on my door. I was not asleep. This is important to say, because I don't want you to imagine some dramatic waking from deep sleep moment. I was sitting up in my reading chair with a lamp on and a book in my lap that I had not been reading, thinking about the workroom, thinking about the drawings, thinking about a house in Washington that existed only on paper and a piece of land that had been waiting for 30 years. The knocking was loud, not aggressive or not just aggressive, urgent. The knocking of someone who has been holding something for 3 days and can no longer hold it. I set down the book. I put on the lamp in the hall. I walked to the door. I opened it. Colt Lawson was standing on my porch at 3 in the morning. He was not in a suit. He was in clothes that looked like he had put them on quickly, jeans, a jacket that didn't match, shoes that weren't the expensive ones. His hair was not composed. His face was not composed. He looked, for the first time in the years I had known him, like a person rather than a performance. He looked, in plain language, like a man who has not slept in 3 days and has driven a very long way and is terrified. We looked at each other. "Arthur," he said. And then he stopped. I waited. I know what time it is. I know you don't want to see me. I drove here because Emma, He stopped again. He looked down at the porch. He looked up. "I don't know how to, I'm not good at this." "I know," I said. It was the first thing I had said to him since the dinner. The first thing I had said to anyone from his world. He nodded. He rubbed the back of his neck. He was trying to find words and not finding them, and I watched him try, and I felt many things watching him, but I will tell you honestly that among them was a kind of terrible sympathy. Not forgiveness, not yet, not then. But the sympathy of a man who has been bad at things in his life and has had to stand in front of someone he hurt and find words that don't exist. "I was wrong," he said finally. Not just the dinner, all of it, for a long time. I said nothing. I thought," he started again. I thought you were trying to insert yourself into our life. I think I saw it that way, like you were, I don't know. I made a decision about who you were early and I never changed it." And that was," he stopped. "That was wrong, that was really wrong." I said, "It was." He looked like he had been hoping I would soften at that admission. I didn't soften. I was listening, and I was standing at my door at 3 in the morning, and I was a father who had driven 1,800 miles and built something for 6 months and watched it go in the trash, and I was not going to soften on cue. "The box," he said. "The land. That I didn't know. I need you to know that I didn't know." "I wouldn't have, Colt," he stopped. "That's not the point," I said. "The point is that it didn't matter to you what was in the box. You had already decided. Before you even touched it, you had already decided what I was worth." He opened his mouth, closed it. "If it had been an empty box," I said, "you would have thrown it away just the same, and my daughter would have looked at the table just the same." Quiet between us was long and cold. "Where is Emma?" I asked. "Hotel in Medford." We drove together. She's not sleeping. She wanted to come to the door. I told her I needed to. I asked her to let me come alone first. I nodded. "She's very broken up," Colt said. And I heard in his voice something genuine, something that was not performance, a man describing the state of his wife's pain with the specific helplessness of someone who knows he caused it. "She's been, since the dinner, she hasn't been herself. She keeps talking about things from when she was young. Things you did, things her mother." He stopped. "She needs to see you." I thought about Emma at 25 at Carol's funeral, her head against my chest. I thought about Emma at 36 looking at the table. "I know," I said. "Land," Colt said. "The property, you should know, Arthur, that's not why I came. We're not going to." "I know," I said again, and I did know. Whatever else I thought about Colt Lawson, standing on my porch at 3 in the morning in mismatched clothes, I knew he hadn't driven 1,800 miles for a piece of land. He'd driven 1,800 miles because his wife was broken and he'd broken her, and he was smart enough to know it. "Tell Emma to come," I said. She knocked 20 minutes later. I had put the kettle on. I had changed out of the clothes. I'd been sitting in all evening into something that felt less like a vigil. I had done these small preparatory things the way you do when you are trying to be ready for something that you cannot actually be ready for. Emma came through the door, and she did not stop in the entry or say hello or do any of the things that grown people do when they arrive somewhere. She crossed the hallway to where I was standing in the kitchen doorway, and she held onto me the way she had at Carol's funeral, the way she had that one night in the kitchen in the dark, the way children hold onto parents when the practiced composure finally gives way. I held her. I don't know how long we stood there. I don't know what I said or what she said. I know that she cried and I cried, which is not something I allow myself very often, and I know that at some point we were at the kitchen table with tea that went cold the way it always does, and she was talking. She was talking about things I needed to hear, and things I already knew, and things I had not known, and things she had been holding for 4 years that needed to come out. About the distance, and how it happened, and the ways she had allowed it to happen. About Colt not excusing him, not asking me to excuse him, but explaining the mechanics of how a person can love someone and still be diminished by them, how the conditioning happens so gradually that you don't see it until you're sitting at an anniversary dinner watching your father walk out the door. About the photograph in the drawer. She had known about the photograph. She had known, and she had not said anything, and she had lived with that shame for 3 years. "I am not a good daughter," she said. "I haven't been, not for a long time. You are my daughter," I said. "That's what you are, the rest we can work on." She looked at me the way she had looked at me at 7 years old, the day she told me science requires sacrifice. That specific Emma look, fierce and uncertain and real. "What was in the box, Dad?" she said. "The drawings, the house. You designed a house for us. Mom's land." She was quiet for a moment. "You spent 6 months." I did. "Didn't you tell me?" "Because I wanted it to be something you received," I said. "Not something you anticipated. I wanted you to see it whole." "I saw it whole," she said quietly. "At the table, after you'd already gone." I nodded. "That was the worst moment of my life," she said. "Worse than Mom, because with Mom there was nothing I could have done. But at the table I could have done something. I could have said something. I could have stood up. And I didn't. I didn't tell her it was all right. It wasn't all right. And Emma, more than anyone, needed not to be told that things were all right when they weren't." "No," I said. "You didn't." "So sorry, Dad. I know you are. I'm going to do better. I know you will." I said that because I believe it. Because I know my daughter, the real one, beneath the years of conditioning and the practiced stillness and the looking away. I know the girl who dug up the garden in the name of science. I know the woman who sat in the dark kitchen and cried without words. She is still in there. She is still worth the 1,800 miles. I am going to tell you how this ends, and I am going to tell it plainly, because I am not interested in fairy tales. Colt and Emma went back to Colorado. I did not sign the land transfer that night. I told them I needed time, which was the truth. The gift I had made was still a gift. The love behind it had not evaporated, but I needed to decide what to do with it on my own terms, not as a response to the pressure of that moment. I signed it 6 weeks later, not because Colt apologized, though he did more than once, in ways that suggested at least some genuine reckoning. Not because I forgave everything immediately. I am still working on that, and I won't pretend otherwise. I signed it because it was the right thing to do. Because Carol's land should be lived on by people who loved her daughter. Because the drawings I'd spent 6 months on described a real house, a house that could hold a real family, and I wanted that to exist in the world. Because I am still a man who builds things that last. Emma calls every Sunday now. Not every Sunday without fail. Life is complicated and schedules slip, but most Sundays. The calls are longer than 12 minutes. She says things she means. She has, in the months since the anniversary dinner, slowly reclaimed something I thought she had lost. A willingness to disagree with Colt, to name things, to have opinions that are her own. It is slow work. It doesn't always go smoothly, but I recognize my daughter in those calls. Colt is not my favorite person. I will not lie to you about that. We are not going to become friends. But there is now a different quality to his acknowledgement of me. He called me in July for my birthday. He said, "Happy birthday, Arthur," and asked how I was, and I said I was fine, and we talked for about 4 minutes about nothing in particular, and when we hung up, I sat for a moment with the phone in my hand, not because it had been warm or meaningful, but because it had been real. A real conversation, not performance. Not tolerance, a small thing, but I have learned at 68 that small things are usually the only things. I want to end with something I thought about on the drive home. Somewhere in the mountains, with the radio off and the box gone and everything quiet, I thought about what the gift was really for, not what was inside it, not the deed, not the drawings. Those were the contents. I mean the gift itself, the act, the 6 months in the workroom, the 1,800 miles. What was I actually doing? I was saying, I see you. I was saying, despite everything, despite the distance and the short calls and the photograph in the drawer, despite the way you've been shaped by someone who doesn't value what I value, I see you, the real you, the you who dug up the garden for science, the you who chose stoicism in the emergency room, the you who cried without words in a dark kitchen. I was saying, you are worth the work, you are worth the sacrifice, you are worth the drive. That's what parents are saying when they do the things parents do. When they drive 1,800 miles and spend 6 months building something and carry it in a brown paper box tied with twine. They are saying, I see you, and you are worth seeing, and I am not going to stop. The trash can couldn't hold that. You cannot throw away the fact of being seen. Colt learned that at 3 in the morning on a porch in Oregon. Emma learned it at a restaurant table, looking at drawings of a house that didn't exist yet but could. I learned it in the silence after I walked out, the silence that felt like defeat but was actually something else, was actually the one thing I had been trying to protect all along, my dignity, my love, the knowledge, unchanged and unchangeable, that I had done everything right. Sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers. They come from the people you would cross 1,800 miles to see. And sometimes the greatest revenge isn't getting even. It's letting the truth do what truth always does in the end. It's letting people live with the moment they finally understand what they threw away. And it's being there, still standing, still whole, when they come to find you. I'm Arthur Brennan. I am 68 years old. I'm a retired architect and a widower and a father who drove a very long way. Thank you for spending part of your day with me. If you've ever been taken for granted by someone you love, type I understand below. And if you're still here, good. You are worth the story.